It was just after sunrise in the quiet outskirts of Abilene, Texas, when Anthony Ridley stepped out of his farmhouse, coffee steaming in one hand. The morning air was crisp, the kind that usually promised another peaceful day. But what he saw next made his heart sink. A brand new steel fence gleamed in the golden light, stretching across his property line like a scar. And right at the center stood a heavy iron gate with a bright red lock hanging from it. Attached to the post was a white sign that read, "Property access managed by Lakeside Meadows HOA." Anthony froze. He didn't belong to any HOA. He had lived on this ranch for 23 years, long before the new housing development sprouted up across the creek. That land had been his father's. It was the road his cattle used every day to reach the water. And now, someone was claiming to control it. He walked up to the fence, his boots crunching the dry earth, and found two men tightening bolts along the gate. They wore matching polo shirts and carried clipboards, clearly hired hands. Moments later, a silver SUV rolled to a stop beside them. Out stepped a woman in sunglasses and a tailored blazer. "Mr. Ridley," she said in a voice that carried authority, "you've been notified of your known compliance issues." Anthony frowned. "Known compliance with what?" "Your fencing," she replied smoothly. "It doesn't meet community standards. Until it's corrected, this gate will remain locked." Anthony blinked in disbelief. "Community standards? This is my ranch. That's my road to the creek." Her lips curved into a polite, cold smile. "It's all outlined in the covenant you agreed to when you purchased your property." "I never agreed to any covenant," he said, voice hardening. But she wasn't listening. She turned, snapped the padlock shut, and walked back to her SUV. The door closed, and with a quick roar of the engine, she drove away, leaving Anthony standing there, helpless and furious. That night, he sat in his kitchen with his neighbor, Glenn, a retired trucker who'd lived nearby for decades. Glenn shook his head slowly. "She's done this before, Tony," Marjorie Kane, a JOA president. "She runs that neighborhood like it's her kingdom. If she doesn't like you, she make your life miserable." Anthony stared at the worn wooden table between them. Then maybe it's time someone stood up to her? Over the next few days, Anthony began collecting every letter he'd ever received from the HOA past notices. Property maps, survey reports, even drone photos showing the fence line. He wasn't a lawyer, but he was a fighter, and this land meant everything to him. He didn't care how many meetings or fines it took. He was ready to fight back. When the next HOA meeting rolled around, Anthony walked straight into the community center. The room was full, the air tense. At the head of the table sat Marjorie, clipboard in front of her like a judge's gavel. "Mr. Ridley," she began, "you've been informed multiple times that your fencing is out of compliance. It does not meet the community aesthetic standards." Anthony stepped forward. "This isn't a golf course, Marjorie. It's a cattle ranch." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some residents looked uncomfortable, others amused. Marjorie's smile tightened. "Our community takes pride in its uniform appearance. If you can't meet those standards, perhaps this isn't the right place for you." Anthony's jaw flexed. "I was here before your community even existed." But she didn't respond. She just tapped her pen on the clipboard, signaling the discussion was overdot by the end of that month. The fines started coming in, first $50 a day, then $100, each envelope stamped HOA Compliance Office in bold red ink. The letters accused him of visual inconsistency and unauthorized structures. Anthony tossed one on the counter and laughed bitterly. "Visual inconsistency? Lady, I raise cattle, not host weddings." Weeks passed. He tried to reason with the county, but even the local zoning office was confused. The HOA had annexed nearby land, but somehow their paperwork never properly reached his property. It was a legal gray area one Marjorie was exploiting to push him around. Then, one afternoon, something caught Anthony's eye. A small for sale sign stuck in the grass just past the fence line. It was a narrow strip of land about 40 feet wide, the same land where the gate stood. He looked closer, realizing what it meant. That piece wasn't owned by the HOA. It was private. And if he bought it, he'd own the gate too. Anthony wasted no time. He called his old friend Brett Lawson, who ran a small property investment firm in town. They set up a shell company, Lone Star Grazing, LLC, and quietly purchased the lot. The deal closed in less than 2 weeks, and not once did the HOA catch wind of who the real buyer was. On a bright Monday morning, Anthony drove up to that same gate. The lock still hung there, red and proud. He pulled out a brand new key, slid it in, and turned. Click. The padlock popped open. He swung the gate wide and drove through, feeling a surge of relief as he watched his cattle graze freely again by the creek. For the first time in months, the ranch felt like his. 2 days later, the silver SUV returned. Marjorie stepped out, flanked by 2 board members. "You've accessed HOA property without authorization," she snapped. Anthony leaned against his truck, calm as ever. "This isn't HOA property anymore." Her eyes narrowed. "Excuse me?" "I own it now," he said, handing her a folded document. "Bought it last week. You can check the county records." Marjorie unfolded the paper, scanned it, and her face turned pale. This can't be right." "Right or not," Anthony said, "it's legal." Word spread fast. Neighbors began whispering. The woman who once terrified half the community was suddenly the one cornered. Still, Marjorie wasn't done. Within a week, Anthony started receiving legal threats letters claiming he had manipulated the system, demands that he return the land. Then came the sheriff's deputies. They arrived one morning as Anthony was feeding his cattle. "Got a complaint from the HOA," one deputy said. "They're claiming trespass." Anthony handed him the deed. The deputy studied it, then gave a small nod. "Looks clean to me," he said. "You own it." Marjorie, standing nearby, turned red with frustration. She sputtered something about covenants and bylaws, but the deputies were already getting back into their truck. The watching neighbors couldn't hide their smirks. A few weeks later, the HOA filed a lawsuit to undo the sale, arguing it violated their territorial rights. But in court, the truth was undeniable. The land was private. The sale was legal. And the HOA had no claim over Anthony's property. The judge ruled in his favor, declaring not only that Anthony owned the land and gate outright, but also ordering the HOA to cover his legal fees. Outside the courthouse, Anthony stood in the Texas sun, reporters crowding around him. "This was never about a fence," he told them. "It was about standing your ground when someone thinks they can take what's yours." When he finally returned home, he leaned against that same gate. The breeze carried the smell of grass and earth, the sound of cattle lowing in the distance. For the first time in months, peace returned to his ranch. Glenn walked up beside him, handing him a cold beer. "Feels good, doesn't it?" he said. Anthony smiled. "Yeah, but the best part? Folks aren't afraid of her anymore. Sometimes it only takes one person standing firm to make the whole town remember some things can't be bullied, bought, or fenced in.